morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we are continuing our look at all of the expansions from the Pokemon trading card game. We're looking at, well, what I like to call the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game. And we have reached Neo Discovery, the second of the Neo sets. Although, as usual, please make sure you spam that like button. Tell me everything you think about this set down in the comment section. Let's keep this series rolling. So, Neo Discovery, released in Japan on the 7th of July in the year 2000, released in English on June the 1st, 2001. So we see the sets are getting closer together. We're less than a year apart now, which is quite nice. Now, this set was the debut of Umbreon and SP. They were the Gen 2, the Gold and Silver Evolutions. They didn't make it into Neo Genesis, but they did make it into Neo Discovery. What was very, very cool here is that we actually had a Holo SP and a Holo Umbreon, but then we had a non-Holo Umbreon and a non-Holo SP. Now, what's interesting is that this is one of the sets where Wizards of the Coast, who were still making the game at the time, were padding out the set by just reprinting Holos as non-Holos. So all the cards that were coming as Holos, you just whack them in as non-Holos as well. Yay! Now we're done. Increasing the size of the set. What's interesting is that the non-Holo Umbreon and Espeon are the only true non-Holo rares in the set. The only ones that didn't actually get printed as Holos and then changed into non-Holos. They are just non-Holo cards. Now, one thing else that is very, very cool here, according to the lovely folks over at Bulbapedia, for some reason, and I don't have a reason for this, there were two cards in the set, Butterfree and Beedrill. They are the Stage 2 bug Pokemon from Gen 1. They were only released as non-Holo cards in the English set. We didn't get them as Holos, just as non-Holos. That's weird. That's so weird, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that in Japan they were printed as Holo cards, and then they made it over here and they're like, no, we're not Holo anymore, we're cool. I cannot be the only one that finds that incredibly strange. I wish I had an answer for you, wish I had an explanation. I just don't. And the other really cool fact about this, now I told you before that we got Dark Raichu back in Team Rocket and actually held up Team Rocket as a set because of the whole, oh, can we really go Dark Raichu, bearing in mind they're called Dark Pokemon over here. Over in Japan, they essentially translate to bad or evil. Clearly not something we want associated with a Pokemon game, a child card game. Well, little bit weird. It ended up in Japan in this set. Don't know why it took so long, but it took a while, and it finally made it over. Now, we did have a couple of theme decks in here. We had Brainwave, and we had Wallop. Now, with this set introducing Umbreon and Espeon, you might think this was an excellent time to make the theme decks based around Umbreon and Espeon. You'd be right that it's a good idea. You'd be wrong that it happened. Brainwave does feature Espeon, Wallop features Hitmontop, which is slightly weird. Now, if we have a look at Brainwave, it is officially a Psychic Water theme deck, but actually it's got 3 Water Pokemon in and 5 Fighting Pokemon. Little bit weird, although it did have water energy, not fighting energy, and the explanation is that the fighting Pokemon were Omanyte and Omastar, who may have been fighting Pokemon, but they attacked for water energy. Now, we always get a Holo Rare in each of the theme decks. Our Holo Rare here was Unknown A. Yeah. We did get Espeon as a Rare, but a Holo Rare was Unknown A, apparently. Moving into Wallop, we have a grass fighting deck, and it is an actual grass fighting deck. Our Holo Rare is Hitmontop, which makes sense given that that is on the front of the box. And we also get a rare Butterfree in there as well. So at least this deck kind of does what it says on the tin. Now, in terms of the most expensive card, something we started doing in these videos lately, the most expensive card is the Holo Umbreon. And it's important to note it is the Holo one, not the non-Holo rare. That one is significantly cheaper. And as with all old cards, it can be quite difficult to really pin down a price, but you're looking at somewhere in the region of $150 for a first edition and $25 for an unlimited. As always, if you've got a better explanation, a better estimation, pop it down in the comment section. But from a little bit of research, that's the rough prices that I found. Now, in terms of the best cards, we carried on what we started in Neo Genesis, and we actually got ourselves a couple of baby Pokemon. And the baby Pokemon we had in this set were very, very good. We had Tyrogue, and we had Igglybuff. Now, starting off with Igglybuff, what we had was another one of these Pokemon that just hated on Pokemon powers. Now, of course, it is a baby Pokemon. It has the baby rule. If it's in the active and your opponent tries to attack, they've got to flip a heads in order to actually get the attack. If they flip tails, the attack fails and their turn ends. And it's got free retreat, no weakness, 30 HP. It's a baby Pokemon. Now, Gay says once during your turn, and this is a Pokemon power, so it works on the bench, choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has a Pokemon power. That Pokemon power stops working until the end of this turn. This effect ends if that Pokemon leaves the bench. There are plenty of things you could use this for, but clearly the number one use for this was Slowking. You could essentially use this to turn off your opponent's Slowking, and that would give you a much easier time through the game. We also saw Tyrogue, and Tyrogue was huge. Again, 30 HP, no weakness, no retreat, all of that. Baby rule. 1 colourless energy, 30 damage, flip a coin. If tails, this does nothing. And okay, if you were against a Cleffa, or any other baby Pokemon, you would have to flip a heads in order to get the attack to work. And then you would have to flip a heads to get through the baby rule. I know it only worked 25% of the time, but it at least worked 25% of the time, and you had the baby rule to protect yourself as well. If we flick forward to Heart Gold Soul Silver, we had a largely similar reprint of Cleffa, and we had a largely similar reprint of Tyrogue, which was used very, very much as a Cleffa counter. So these did come back very many years later. Now, we also saw Hyper Devolution Spray. This was not a huge set in terms of amazing new cards and amazing new decks. Neo Genesis was. We did that in the previous video, link in the description. And the Neo sets as a whole brought in a lot of very good cards and a lot of very good decks. Neo Discovery was probably the weakest of the 4 sets. And Hyper Devolution Spray was a very good card, but it wasn't really a very good card yet. So what Hyper Devolution Spray did was it allowed you to choose one of your evolved Pokemon, take the highest stage evolution from that Pokemon, and put it into your hand. When we later got Dark Crobat in Neo Destiny, it had the same ability, incidentally, as the Crobat we got many years later in Phantom Forces, that drops damage counters when you evolve it. Yeah, it was really good with that. Wasn't so good at the time, but it did get a lot better when we had relevant Pokemon later. And the only other, and I'm thinking through a whole bunch of old decks, and the only other really good card that's jumping out to me here is Fossil Egg. You see, Fossil Egg was a trainer card. There were only 4 trainer cards in the set, incidentally, and we've looked at 2 of them. But Fossil Egg was a trainer card, and it said flip a coin. If head, search your deck for a card that evolves from Mysterious Fossil and put it onto your bench, or put a card that evolves Mysterious Fossil from your hand onto your bench. Either way, treat the new card as a basic Pokemon. If you searched your deck, shuffle it. Can't play it if your bench is full. So now, rather than having to use a Mysterious Fossil and then evolve it up into something like an Aerodactyl, for instance, you could just get the Aerodactyl straight out. We see this in the modern game with Pokemon Research Lab. A very similar deal. But this was actually used to make the Aerodactyl from Fossil into a significantly better deck. So that was nice. Now again, in terms of decks, a lot of the decks came around a little bit later. They came around in Neo Genesis, or they came after one of the other two sets, but there are a couple of decks, I think, which we can have a little bit of a gander at. And I should mention that when looking at decks, I do use Jason Kaczynski's blog. I'll pop a link in the description. If you want full deck list for these decks, that is an excellent place to go and have a look at. So one deck that was really, really nice was Sneasel with Aerodactyl. Now Sneasel we talked about in the previous video. We're not going to need to spend too much time talking about Sneasel. It had the phenomenal beat up attack whereby you did 20 damage for every heads you flipped, and you flipped a coin for every one of your Pokemon in play, and you would use Darkness Energy to do even more damage. It was a little bit dumb over the top good. Where did Aerodactyl come in? Well, Aerodactyl had a Pokemon power that says no more evolution cards can be played. It wasn't a particularly good attacker, but it stopped your opponent evolving. So essentially what you would do is you would use that egg we talked about a moment ago, that fossil egg. You would use that to get Aerodactyl out, and then you would stop your opponent evolving. You couldn't evolve either, but you had a really good basic Pokemon already up and raring and ready to go. Your opponent couldn't evolve. You were good. Obviously, Igglybuff was a really good option here, as it was in a lot of decks. And we did play Murkrow as well. Murkrow we mentioned in the Neo Genesis video. It basically could trap you in the active in one turn. It stopped you retreating essentially for the rest of the game. And then you could just poke 20 damage around the field. It was a very, very good card. Now, there are a couple of other decks that I do want to mention here that were not necessarily Neo Discovery decks, but they are decks that do need to be mentioned. One of which I liked very much indeed was Giovannis Match Amp. You could argue it wasn't really a Neo Discovery deck, but we do need to talk about it, so let's pop it in here. And my explanation is that really the latest card that it would play was Igglybuff, which was a Neo Discovery card. There we go. Giovannis Match Amp had the amazing Pokemon power Fortitude. If Giovannis Match Amp would be knocked out by an attack, flip a coin. If heads, it's not knocked out, but it goes down to 10 HP instead. And then we remember that focus band that I told you about in the previous video, whereby if a Pokemon would be knocked out by an attack, you flip a coin, and if heads it's not knocked out, it goes down to 10 HP instead. Yeah, you see where we're going with this, ladies and gentlemen? It just basically turned Giovanni's Match Amp into a you've got a 25% chance of ever actually knocking it out. And this might be a good time to mention Giovanni's Last Resort, which removed all damage counters from one of your Pokemon with Giovanni in its name. You did have to discard your entire hand to do it, but then again, if you already had a Giovanni's Match Amp with no damage on, hitting for 30 damage for every heads you can flip from 4 coins that you have to flip double head just to try and knock out, do you need much of a hand? There is a strong argument that you don't. I also want to have a quick shout out to Sabrina's Haunter, of all things. Now, Sabrina's Haunter was a fun little deck, and although we played Sabrina's Gengar, and we did play Sabrina's Gengar, we've focused on Sabrina's Haunter here. 2 Psychic Energy, flip a number of coins equal to the total number of Sabrina's Ghastlys, Sabrina's Haunters, and Sabrina's Gengars you have in play, so it really should be 4. This attack does 30 damage times the number of heads. So interestingly here, you've basically got the same attacks we had on Giovanni's Match Amp, but for significantly less energy. You could evolve up into Sabrina's Gengar and turn off Pokemon powers, or do 40 damage while stopping the retreat, but that wasn't the main goal here. And we should also mention Brock's Ninetales. Now, I talked about this in a previous video. Brock's Ninetales is a really fun one that you can basically evolve into whatever you like. So you could evolve Brock's Ninetales into Sabrina's Haunter, and then you would actually have 6 of the Sabrina's Gengar line on the field. Yeah, that would be good. Then you're flipping 6 coins and doing 30 damage for each heads for only 2 energy. It's really kind of fun. Also should mention Sabrina's ESP here. You attach it to one of your Pokemon with Sabrina in its name. You discard it at the end of your turn. But if you use an attack that involves flipping coins, you can reflip all of those coins once. So you even get a second go. Want to know something even slightly more disgusting about that? It wasn't technically a Pokemon tool, because Pokemon tools didn't exist until Neo Genesis, and this was a gym card. And that means you can play it with Focus Band. Yowza. There is an excellent chance that Giovannis Match Amp and Sabrina's Haunter get their own videos in the future, but it was absolutely worth mentioning them here because we haven't mentioned them before, and they were good, relevant decks. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Neo Discovery, a very good set, a very fun set. Not the biggest and bestest set ever, certainly a little bit of a letdown after Neo Genesis, but not without its charm, and it brought us a very versed Umbreon, so that alone has got to be worth celebrating. But now I'd like to know what you think about this, so let me know in the comment section. Go nuts, be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where we talk about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but are still pretty gosh darned awesome. But by far the most important thing is always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.